with lots of colleagues from UNDP and UN Women. So I'll be moderating the session. My name is Silke Stab. I'm from UN Women's Research and Data section. And the first segment, we have three components in a way. We'll have the tracker core team, people from the tracker core team presenting some of the key findings of the latest tracker update. Aroa Santiago from UNDP will give a short introduction. Then Connie Tabush from UN Women will present some of the key findings. And I think Isuna Dugarova from UNDP will, apart from also presenting some of the findings, throw out some ideas for how country offices can use the data in the tracker. And then we'll finish with two colleagues who have been very involved in the UN's own work and will provide some insights into how gender has been reflected in and mainstreamed in the socioeconomic impact assessments and the socioeconomic response plans of the UN system. And that's Andrea Balzano from UNDP and Silja Rajanda from UN Women. So without further ado, we'll go into this first session, and then we have a second session with colleagues from country and regional level, which who I'll introduce once we get there. Over to you, Aroa.
Thank you, Silke, so much. I'm sharing the screen. I hope you can see it well. So yes, thank you, colleagues, for joining today, and very happy to discuss together what the tracker is for those who don't know it yet, and what to do with it for both those who know it and those who are learning today about it. So this is the main page of the tracker that you can see there. And like Raquel mentioned, it monitors more than 3,000 policy responses right now from more than 200 countries and territories. And one of the good points of this is that it analyzes all policy measures that we can find. And then also it gathers all policy measures we can find and then analyzes them from a gender perspective. So this gives it a quite comprehensive view, and also it helps us, it allows us to analyze the percentage of measures that are actually supporting the needs that women are facing. We know that the pandemic has had a severe impact on women, the crisis of care services, the rise on gender-based violence, the increase on women's economic security. So these tools allows us to know whether the size of the response of governments matches the size of the challenges. So we invite you to go to the main page, consult the methodology. You can see there frequently asked questions. You can play around and you can download the complete data. You can use it then for your own research, but we are also here to provide you with this support. So you can feel free to reach any of the tracker core team, and we will be very happy to conduct from thematic research, comparative analysis, identify good practices on a specific policy area that you're interested in. So also we encourage you to reach us. So how does it work? How do we collect the data for the tracker? It was launched first in September 2020, and it grew organically. We got help here and there from some UNDP and UN Women colleagues, but now we have it more institutionalized. On the last update of March, we have been following the process that you can see on screen. So we use already existing data. We don't duplicate efforts. So we get data from existing dashboards of the World Bank, of ECLAC, ILO. Also, we use existing efforts like the one that the University of Pittsburgh was already doing with UNDP on the JEPA report. So they gathered information, the task forces that we also inputted to the tracker. So we use what is already there, but then on the step 2, we do additional research, additional analysis to fill gaps that we can have. And for this, we have a large team of UN volunteers that are regularly trained, are regularly supported to fit with the data that we need. And also the tracker team developed a set of gender analytical questions. I think that this is the unique value added that the tracker is offering. So with these gender analytical questions, it is where we can say what percentage of measures are actually contributing to women's economic security, gender-based violence, or care. And finally, once we have all this data collected, then we distribute it with our country offices and with the support of the regional offices that coordinate this work. So UN Women and UNDP colleagues can help us to add additional data that we may have missed, or even some of them, they have consulted with governments to use this opportunity also to start opening dialogues with governments on the gender sensitivity of measure. So Connie, over to you.
Thank you, Aroa. So following up on that, this slide shows you a bit of the structure of the policy measure database. And as I think Aroa already mentioned, the database contains more than 3,000 measures taken in response to COVID that fall into 4 main policy categories. That is social protection, labor markets, fiscal and economic, and violence against women measures. And as you can see in the different color coding of the measures of the different categories, there are 2 different approaches that we took in defining which measures are gender sensitive, which are the ones in green. So the first approach defines all violence against women measures as gender sensitive by default, because they are aimed specifically at women and girls, right? The second one consists of looking at a broad range of social protection, labor market, and fiscal measures taken in response to COVID, and identify a subset of those that is gender sensitive. So in the case of social protection and labor market measures, those defined as gender sensitive are those measures that either target women's economic security or address unpaid care. Whereas in the case of fiscal and economic measures, those are defined as those providing support for female-dominated sectors of the economy, on the assumption, obviously, that this is likely to protect women's employment and thereby their economic security. So if we move to the next one, so what are the key findings that we're seeing in our policy analysis, and what are governments doing to protect women's needs and rights? So if you look at the bar chart above, you can see the breakdown of gender sensitive measures by type. And there we can see that most of these measures, 832 in 149 countries, focus on stepping up action to address violence against women and girls. Whereas measures to strengthen women's economic security and address unpaid care are much fewer in number, in spite of what we know in terms of the fallout, the rise in unpaid care and the impact this had on women's livelihood. In fact, if you look at the pie chart below that compares the relative weight of gender sensitive measures as a proportion of the total social protection and job response, you can see that the overall socioeconomic response is fairly gender blind. Only 13% of these measures target women's economic security by putting resources into their own hands, and only 11% address unpaid care by providing mostly family leaves and support for care services. So if we move to the next one, just want to finish by showing you a snapshot of overall country responses that really show that only less than 20% of the countries analyzed, that is 42 countries, register what we define as a holistic response. That is a response spanning all 3 dimensions, that is supporting women's economic security, unpaid care, and violence against women. So there's much room for improvement on that front. And with that, Esuna, you can.
Yes, thank you, Connie. So I think one of the possible correlations we can establish in terms of socioeconomic and violence response is the poor representation of women in decision making. And I think this is the second important dimension that we added to the tracker in March, is to look at women's leadership and participation in national COVID task forces. This is more like institutional setup in the COVID response. And then we looked at over 300 task forces in over 187 countries. And there are mainly two types of task forces: experts and decision making. Decision making are those that composed of government representatives and those that are responsible for making and implementing decisions in COVID response. And then we have an expert task forces, those that are mainly composed of people outside the governments and those that act as advisors to the government, such as medical doctors, academics, and so on. And then we also had a sectoral focus that ranged from public health to education and economic. Now, if we look at some of the key findings in terms of women's representation in those key decision-making institutional bodies, we can see that surprise, surprise, women are underrepresented, right? So we only have 24% of all task force members who are women in 137 countries. If it's even less for women's leadership, we have only 19% of women leaders. And actually, in fact, women are even less represented in decision-making task forces than in expert task forces. And we can see in terms of disaggregation by regions and countries, we see that countries like Argentina, where women are most represented, and also we see some good practices in South Africa and Andorra. And in terms of there is more room for improvement, we see in East Asia and Southeast Asia. So, and it doesn't come as a surprise that most members of those task forces are men, and we found that only 4% of task forces achieve gender parity. Now, in terms of the ideas, we have brainstormed a lot in terms of how we can leverage the a lot of wealth of the data that the COVID tracker provides. And if we can provide all of them, Aroa, please. So you can see all the different options that we have. And we're here actually to discuss them, and please feel free to send your ideas. But I actually would like to first share some of the findings of tentative surveys that we conducted so far with our participants of this webinar. And we actually found that around 80% of survey respondents have used the tracker for external advocacy, and around 60% have used it for national reporting. We also have seen responses that have used the tracker for developing proposals in terms of resource mobilization efforts. So these are the key findings we have so far, but we can see that we have different options for you to use the tracker. And I think the key, as I see it, if we categorize in this, several entry points, I think one is to use the tracker as repository of data, of good practices that can inform and hopefully influence policy making. But there's on the side of the UN, we can also inform our own strategies, for instance, as we do in the new gender equality strategy. And we know that almost 70% of UNDP country offices have their own gender equality strategies and action plans. So this kind of tracker provides that data to inform the iterations of those type of national planning and also our own planning and informing our own interventions. So with that, I think I will give over to Andrea, who will tell us more about socioeconomic impact assessments and socioeconomic response plans, where the data from the tracker can also duly inform those mechanisms.
Thank you, Asuna, very much. Can you hear me? Yes. Good. So in the next few slides, my colleague Celia and I will briefly present the findings of 2 desk reviews conducted during the past months on the gender dimensions of the UN response to COVID-19. These studies have not been published yet, so this is one of the reasons we thought it was important to share some of the results now. These reviews included gender analysis of, on the one hand, 146 SAYAs. This was conducted by UNDP, by a team of members from headquarters and from the regional hubs, and I see many of our regional advisors are connected today. Thank you very much for your very valuable support here. And then the other study was a review of 108 SERPs, and this was conducted by a team of UN Women colleagues at headquarters. In both cases, we used the same methodology. We used the gender mainstreaming minimum standards put forward by the UNCT SWAB, and this is why our results are comparable. The initial findings and conclusions were complemented by 3 virtual consultations with 180 colleagues from 15 different countries, from 15 different UN entities, I'm sorry. Now, to the results of the SEAS. As you can see in the pie chart on the left of your screen, 43% of the SEAS, this is 63 out of 146, met or exceeded minimum standards for integration of gender analysis. This means that 43% of the SEAS included sex disaggregated data, gender analysis of the causes of inequalities, and gender sensitive recommendations in at least half of the sectors analyzed. This is a good start, but we can see there's room for definitely room for improvement. You see that the percentage is it's just a little bit higher of the percentage the governments show in the tracker. So there's room for improvement, especially as Estuna said, if we want to make the case to governments to perform better. On the right side of the screen, you can see the topics that were identified by the SEAS as key. And you can see the first 3 of them were 59% of the SEAS identified issues related to employment and gender in general, sex disaggregation of data, impact on women's employment, care responsibilities, gender segregation of markets. 52% identified gender-based violence as an issue, and 47% identified issues related to the care economy as an issue. So this is a very, very brief summary of the results of the SEAS. Over to you, Celia, to continue with the findings from the SERPs and the recommendations.
Thank you so much, Andrea. If we can move over to the next slide, please. Good morning, afternoon, and evening, colleagues. So the findings from our analysis of 108 SERPs are very much in line with the analysis that Andrea just presented, and actually with also what's coming out of the gender tracker, indicating much room for improvement, and also that the analysis that we undertake does not always translate into what we actually do or plan to do. And just as a general observation, as a positive, the SERPs indicated very clearly that we as a system are committed to gender equality in our response, and generally see gender equality as a principle that we must address in our work. So 85 out of 108 SERPs, or 79%, identified gender equality as a priority, as you can see from this slide. And all 108 SERPs identify women as a vulnerable population. Now, translating this analysis into planned interventions was less consistent. Only 10, and just to indicate that only 10 included gender analysis of the most disadvantaged and at-risk groups. And with Leave No One Behind as a central transformative principle of the 2030 agenda, you can see that this obviously presents a challenge to us. But our analysis of the SERP pillars and the analysis that was included, gender analysis that was included there, and of the planned interventions, shows that while we're challenged often on the analytical front, we're even more challenged into translating this into interventions. So just a third of the SERPs, 32 out of 108, include gender analysis consistently across the narratives of these SERP pillars. And that goes down to just a fifth of SERPs, or 24 out of 108, that include gender responsive interventions across all of the SERP pillars and thereby comply with UNCT SWAP gender mainstreaming standards. Looking at the interventions on the next slide, a brief word on these. And here, if we can move over to the next slide, thank you. The green bar on this slide indicates the number of SERPs that, for example, include the respective pillars or intervention areas, and the blue bar indicates the fraction of SERPs that includes gender-targeted interventions. And as you can see from the bar near the bottom there, GBV, a common theme analyzed in SAYERS and that comes across strong also in the gender tracker, stands out as the most common area of gender responsive interventions, with 106, almost all of the SERPs, including at least one GBV specific interventions. In contrast, the majority, 75 out of 94 of the SERPs that incorporate Pillar 4, so not all of the SERPs incorporate Pillar 4, on the macroeconomic response, do not highlight a single gender-specific interventions. And in areas such as education, nutrition, water, sanitation, and hygiene, there's a lack of both gender analysis we found and also of gender-responsive interventions. So moving over to the next slide on recommendations. These recommendations focus on UNCT processes. We have, as Andrea highlighted, been working on a UN SDG technical note, which we look forwards to disseminating once that's been endorsed. These recommendations focus on UNCT processes, understanding that all SERPs are planned to be folded into the regular programming cycle at country level, focused on the cooperation framework by year end. So they've built on the findings of the SAYERS and SERPs, and also on consultations with colleagues, where we basically sought to triangulate what we saw from our analysis and what colleagues were sharing in terms of process of developing the documents and where they saw the challenges and opportunities. And the technical note includes these in more detailed form, but just a couple of notes here. So while there were weaknesses, obviously a first step is to build on what you actually already have. So both in terms of the existing analysis and planned interventions, making sure that those are reflected in the CCA, in the cooperation framework that's being developed and in joint work plans. And in countries that are developing a new cooperation framework, there are of course opportunities to build on lessons learned, to build on this analysis and strengthen the UNCT response in terms of gender and COVID-19 interventions. All UNCTs are working on joint work plans, and in the context of the joint work plans, there are many opportunities, of course, to ensure that our response is more gender responsive and that gender equality is at its center. And this requires, among other, having the right people around the table. So there are recommendations there around ensuring that gender advisors within the UN system are there, ensuring that we consult with key government counterparts, the national women's machinery being key, and gender equality CSOs. Areas that I just mentioned, education, nutrition, WASH, and the macroeconomic response, are areas where we need to give more thought in the context of our response moving forwards. M&E is central. It provides us with a feedback loop on how effective our programming is, and here gender data gaps, which also emerged from our analysis, need to be addressed. And all of this, of course, requires resources and resource tracking, ensuring we're investing the needed resources. And these recommendations are, as mentioned, highlighted in the technical note alongside lessons learned and future considerations and good practices. And the note is undergoing validation, and we really look forwards to sharing it once it has been validated and endorsed. So with that, colleagues, thanks so much to our Gender Tracker colleagues for the opportunity to participate and contribute, and over on our side. Thank you.
Thanks so much to all the presenters in this first session. This was really interesting. I think as Silja said at the beginning, at the end, I mean, there are some interesting overlaps between the findings of the Global Tracker and the SERPs and SEAAs. I wanted to just take, before we go into the next session, a quick minute to introduce some of the other team members, because a lot of them are here and recognize their contribution. So As you may imagine, this has been a huge team effort, and many people have been involved in this over what is now over years of worth of work. So we have Brianna Howell here from the UNDP side, who was, among other things, very critical for the women's representation dimension. We have Daniela de los Santos from the UNDP Regional Office, who was involved from the very beginning. Temi Adeoye, also from UNDP Gender Team. We have Gorgana Tsvetanova from UN Women Research and Data, and Andy Espinoza and Louis Williams, who are also from the UN Women Research and Data team, apart from all of the UNVs that Raquel already acknowledged at the beginning. So thanks to you all, and thanks to the country and regional colleagues who've also contributed to validation, and from whom we will hear now about some of the ongoing efforts to use the tracker for policy influence and advocacy. Just a quick reminder to put your questions in the chat, and so we can come back to them at the end. And also to, if you haven't done so already, take the quick survey that is on the registration page that, as Suna referred to, it'll be really, really useful for us to have that data. And so without further ado, we'll move on to the presentations. We have 3 presentations from the UNDP Regional Bureau of Africa by Tabu Jimmy first, followed by Patricia Duarte Rangel from the UN Women Brazil Country Office, and then a joint presentation by Rania Tazari and Shata Mahmoud from the regional offices, respectively UNDP, UN Women of Arab States. I would ask you each to not take more than 7 minutes, please, so that we have some time at the end for questions, answers, and discussions. Thank you. Tabu, over to you. Yeah, there we go.
Thank you, Silke. Okay. Good. Okay, thank you for this opportunity. I'll try to squeeze, the slides are very few, really not much. Following the introduction and the launch, the rollout of the tracker, the Regional Service Center, in collaboration with a number of
Am I the only one who can't hear? Tabu, are you still here?
We can't hear him.
We lost him.
Okay, shall we perhaps, if we don't hear back, move on to one of the other presentations and come back to Tabu later? Patricia, do you want to go next? Sorry for the for the last minute assault.
It's no problem at all. I hope he can come back. Sometimes the connection does this kind of thing to us. Okay, so yeah, before starting my brief intervention, I want to thank you one more time for the opportunity to be here at the country office. In our cluster, leadership and political participation, we have been using the global tracker from day one. So we were very much looking forward to exchanging experiences with other offices and with other colleagues. It's a really, really big pleasure to be here. So I will do my best not to speak over 7 minutes. So I will just keep up on time here. And in those 7 minutes, I would like to address 2 questions. One of them is how we have used the global tracker so far. And the second one, what we have gained from this experience. But also before starting and talking about each of our activities related to the tracker, it's important to stress that the product and processes that I'm going to mention here today they are still under validation. So we don't have final products. Our drafts are still unpublished because they are under evaluation of the program manager, the representative. So what I'm going to share with you today should be considered experimental or preliminary so far. Hopefully not for a very long time anymore. So first question, how we have used the global tracker to promote gender sensitive response and to promote gender equality in the recovery efforts at the country level. So we have done a number of activities, but I would like to mention two of them. One is that we have been using data from the global tracker to elaborate knowledge products, country level knowledge products. And second, we have used the global tracker to guide one rapid assessment that we are conducting. Actually, we are going to start it in June in the Amazon forest to assess how the necessities and the point of views, the perspectives of indigenous women and girls are being addressed in the Amazon region. So I am going to mention a few more details on each of the two activities so it can perhaps be useful to the colleagues. So regarding to the knowledge products, it's part of a broader activity, which is to monitor the policy measures that have been enacted by the government and the subnational governments to tackle COVID with gender lenses. And one way to disseminate this data, and of course, to bring the topic to the public debate, is to elaborate fact sheets, right? And we have elaborated a few drafts. One of them will probably be published in a month or so, I believe. And in order to elaborate this fact sheet, we have used data from the global tracker, specifically from the dashboards and from regional fact sheets, the Arab States region fact sheet and the European and Central Asian fact sheet. Both of them are available on the tracker website. And we used this amount of data to compare Brazil with other countries. And after doing that, we came to the conclusion, and this is in our policy brief, that Brazil has to date less gender sensitive measures than the global average. So by having evidence and sharing, and gathering evidence on this regard, we can provide information and we can provide evidence to the government stating that the country still have room for improvement when it comes to gender equality and gender sensitive response to the crisis, to the COVID crisis. And with the help of the tracker, we can also provide the government with good practices which have been employed in other countries. So for example, one very interesting example, when we talk about women's economic security, considering all the gender sensitive measures in Brazil, only 20% of them address economic security of women. And this is especially relevant in a moment when 52% of the female population in Brazil is out of the labor market. So more than half of Brazilian women do not have a job at the moment, do not have work. So we can, for example, with the help of the tracker, tell the government, the Brazilian government, that countries such as Togo, Georgia, and Morocco have CBT programs, have also provided financial aid to women entrepreneurs and informal traders. The second use we did to the global tracker was to conduct a rapid assessment at the local level. So we are very interested in getting to know how indigenous women and girls are being contemplated, incorporated in the response within the Amazon forest, the Amazon region. And this is part of the UN Women component of an interagency program, which is funded by the United Nations COVID-19 Response and Recovery Multi-Partner Trust Fund. Big name for the fund, we usually say COVID-19 MPTF. And as part of our component, we are doing this rapid assessment. And the main element of the rapid assessment is a survey, which is going to be conducted with duty bearers in the month of June this year. So we are about to conduct this survey. And in order to develop the questionnaire for the survey, we used the tracker methodological note to mirror especially the definitions of gender sensitive measures and also the policy categories, because we wanted to have some kind of harmonization and make sure that the results can be compared. So I only have 30 seconds, and within the 30 seconds, I would like to say that what we have gained from the tracker is something very precious. Well, we all know that in order to put women and girls at the center of the efforts to recover from the pandemic, we need to have gender analysis and sex disaggregated data. It's impossible to conduct gender sensitive interventions without the data. And the data, the evidence has to be packed in a cogent way with harmonized data collection and reporting tools. And this is provided by the tracker. So by using the data available at the tracker, at the global tracker, and comparing them with data that we have from official sources in the country level, we can use the evidence to promote and to inform policies, to inform governments, and incorporate women and girls in the response. So that's all for now, but I'm happy to answer any questions you may have here or by email afterwards. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Patricia. This was excellent. I particularly like the way you've used the tracker data, not only for Brazil, but for the other countries to do more of a comparative analysis. I think that's really powerful. I hear that Tabu is back. So let's give it another try with the presentation. And I'm also hearing that if we have further connection problems, Marie-Claire will step in. So over to you, Tabu.
Hello? Are you getting me? Hello?
Yes, 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 we can hear you.
Okay, I had a network problem and I'll try my best. In case it all goes bad, my colleague Marie will come. Okay, Zita, is okay. Yes. I hope everyone can see the presentation.
If you could go in full presentation mode, that would be even better. Full screen mode.
Yes, please. The network is slow, but I'll put it on the mode. Okay, good. Great. So the presentation will cover 3 dimensions. So I'll try to really be within the 7 minutes you're provided. I'll basically try to look at how we have tried our best to introduce the tracker in the region. That is the region of beautiful Africa. The second dimension, look at experience in using the tracker, and then also the challenges and possible solution that we actually proposed. So to begin with, of course, we took the initiative to introduce the tracker in the region by having
Oh, I think we may have lost you again. Tabu or Marie-Claire?
Okay, Silk is Marie-Claire. I can hear you. Okay, let me try to see if I can share the screen just to back up Tabu. Let me take Tabu, he's calling me.
Thank you. shall we maybe give you a bit more time to coordinate and take the Arab States office in the meantime?
No, it's fine. I think it's
Okay.
fine. Okay, so I'm trying to share my screen. Just give me a few seconds. Yeah.
So colleagues,
Okay.
the network is bad, so we can proceed.
Okay, thank you, Tabu. I will try to proceed. Just in case I missed something, you will come in.
Okay.
So, colleagues, can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, colleagues, and thank you very much, Tabu. Oh, as Tabu has highlighted, we tried to introduce the use of tracker on the region because we are a regional office. Our main role is to advise countries, you know, in certain roles. So what we did on the first instant, we had a webinar with UN Women Regional and West and Central African region as part of the commemoration of 16 days of activism on violence against women. So during this webinar, our regional advisor, Odette Kabaya, has presented the global or the tracker to during that webinar so that people will see it as a tool to advocate for increased investment and commitment toward gender responsive policies. But also not only Odette or our regional advisor, other 4 countries, Nigeria, Senegal, Cape Verde, and Cote d'Ivoire, they were invited to share their experiences as countries that have implemented prominent measures to address evil during the COVID-19 pandemic. And all they were selected depending on their prominent measures of the tracker. So we can say that this event had gathered more than 16 participants from the ministries of gender, UN agencies, regional entities, and more particularly, the accent was put on advocating for participants to use the tracker data as a prominent reference to assess the gender sensitivity during the crisis. Also, another interesting case is that during that webinar, participants were keen to use tracker data because they understand the importance and they understand where the region is doing well and where the region is not doing well. So they also, some of them acknowledge that their countries didn't have measures in the tracker. They acknowledged that and wanted to have more measures. And secondly, the second experience on how we use the tracker data is during our normal role of advising countries. When we're reviewing the document or during the advisory meetings, we will advise countries to say you are unrising this activity or this initiative on COVID-19, it will be good if you take a reference on the tracker. For example, when we're reviewing the RRFs or the CPDs, the policy briefs, even in some advisory meetings, we make sure that countries are aware of this tool of the tracker. So when some of the best practices we find, we advised one team on the regional office, the team that does work around the regional stabilization. They wanted to do a policy brief on COVID-19 and SGBV in the Lake Chad Basin. So we advised them to make a reference on the tracker. And in the end, this brief have used the tracker in the whole chapter. And that chapter was unrising the gender sensitivity of policies or of the SGBV during the COVID-19 pandemic. So, but this brief, just to highlight that this brief is still in process. It will be published maybe this month or next month. Another best practice is that we noticed that most of countries are not making reference to the tracker. So we developed an Excel template to document country officers' experiences or plans to use the tracker. Then as a pilot, we shared this template to 10 country offices, and among 5 countries that have replied as of now, 2 have confirmed to have used tracker data to develop some documents, including concept notes, TORs, or other documents. And the good thing is all those countries who replied, 5 countries, they have expressed the interest of using the tracker in the future. They have plans. So then what plans do we have as the regional office to enforce the use of tracker? The first thing is the regional office now is preparing a webinar early July to provide a space for gender focal points to share best practices and upcoming plans to use the tracker data. And apart from targeting the gender focal points, we want to target like people who are involved in designing projects, such as economists or project managers, as a way to further sensitize the tracker data within the organization and even outside. Because when we'll be advising them, we also advise them to also advise their partners to make reference of the tracker. We want also to continue mainstream tracker data through our normal regional advisory support to country offices or regional partners. And also the last one, we want to keep, not the least, we want to keep using this template so that we can kind of document best practices that can be shared with other countries to tell them like, hey, you see, these countries are doing this in terms of using tracker data. This can be the best practices you can use. So then we come to the point of saying, during this time of using the tracker, that have we encountered some challenges? Yes, we did. The first challenges we encountered was the lower awareness on the tracker data at different levels, both internal and external. Like, for instance, when we were advising people to use tracker data, we noticed that most of people were not aware of the tracker. And for these people, gender focal points are excluded because they are the ones to validate the tracker. The second challenges we encountered is like some countries don't have information in the tracker. And when advising them to use the tracker, that it was hard when they don't have information. I noted the example of case for Eritrea that wanted to write a brief on COVID-19 and gender. We advised them to use the tracker as a prominent reference, but they couldn't find information here. But they were keen to showcase to the Eritrea country that there is a tracker that is documenting or monitoring policies so that even data for Eritrea will be later included. The third challenges we met was some limitation in the tracker data. I know the tracker will be continuously updated, but when we're using the tracker data, we advised some countries, but we noticed that their initiatives were related to the activities that are not yet included in the tracker, such as innovation, digitalization, or green economy. So then we proposed some solutions, which is a small list. And I know in the previous presentation, they have included the good possible solutions, but we proposed also some of the solutions at the regional level. One being to increase awareness of using the tracker at different social medias or webinars, targeting both UNDP partners and external parties, including the academias. Those are the people who write different documents and sensitize, so that the tracker will be known at different stages. We proposed maybe to learn kind of an online survey to both internal and external, not only for gender focal points or the people who attend the webinar, to explore the gaps and the strength that can be, to know how the tracker can be used. I think that was all for the presentation for the regional office, and we are happy that we could share our experience, and we are ready for questions. Thank you very much, and over.
Thank you, Marie-Claire and Tabu, and for this presentation. Very interesting use of the violence data, which I think we haven't heard all that much about yet. So that's a really nice contribution. We're now fairly close to 10 or to the end of our session, depending on where we're at. I want to hand over to our colleagues in Arab states, but we will have very little time for a question and discussion session at the end now. So if you put your questions, comments in the chat. Some of them have already been answered by colleagues in the chat. We'll try and continue to do that, given that we probably won't have much time to answer actual questions at the end of the session. So over to Rania and Shata to share their experience.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm just trying to, I think you can see my, yeah, okay. So we'll start, thank you very much for this opportunity. We will start with, I'll just start with what we have done at the regional office. For us, basically what we have done is that we've done a joint launch with UNDP last April for the Arab states. For this launch, we had colleagues from headquarters presenting the global tracker. And we did also present the joint fact sheet that we have also jointly worked on that includes insights into how the region is performing when it comes to gender equality and the COVID response. We have also worked on a number of common social messages about how the region is performing, and it was very much shared widely among different websites and outlets. For the webinar, we had speakers, we had a moderated session, we tried to do a diverse background of speakers. We had someone who's heading a regional NGO network. We had the head of the national JNCW, the National Women Missionary in Jordan, and we had a focal point from the Ministry of Finance in Morocco. This helped in a way just to bring more interaction to the use of the tracker. The launch had around 200 participants that included government, international organizations, and CSOs. We had independent activists and freelance consultant. We had a number of UN agencies as well joining. One outcome, a key outcome of the launch was to continue the regional discussion on how to take the other themes and focus on zoom in the specific policy measures. And we are in discussions along with UNDP on how basically to probably do another webinar on social protection. How can we use it? We have a number, how can this tracker be used? We had a number of ideas that they are work in progress, and we are working in close collaboration, of course, as I said, with UNDP. The global tracker itself, with the specific indicators and measure, was a good entry point for initiating dialogues at the regional level. And as I said, in the joint tracker, we had a moderated session, which very much had a very interaction on the tracker as a tool, how to use it, and what are the main follow-up and main recommendations. We are also thinking of, as said in other presentations, like taking some measures from different regions and doing some comparisons, and especially in our region across countries, just to bring, incentivize the countries to act and highlight some themes from other regions and countries, because we know that the Arab states are a bit low when it comes to certain measures. That's why we want to push for that. We as well, one of the things that we have talked in the launch and in our discussion afterwards is how we are able to locate. The tracker helps as a tool to locate these positive experiences in the region and across the world, because for countries, to learn and think of initiating dialogues for longer term policies. We are as well working on with our country offices. We are starting with and that Rania will be discussing it more in her presentation about country offices. We are starting with Jordan, and we are taking it with other country offices and starting a national dialogue and adaptation. I would say that there are a number of participants from the launch from conflict countries that found the tool to be very useful. Participants from Yemen, Iraq, and Palestine found it to be very useful and asked actually for more efforts to localize and adapt the tool into their own context. I will pass it on now to Rania.
Thank you, Shada. What I will present is the possible options that came about from our regional dialogue from those national and regional stakeholders about how we can actually make the tracker useful at country level. And one of the most important recommendations was to ensure national ownership, both in terms of updating the tracker as well as monitoring the tracker. In addition to adaptation, which speaks a bit to a point that Marie has mentioned in terms of missing certain indicators. So at country level, these dialogues that combine governments as well as different stakeholders from civil society, private sector, academia can have an opportunity to create a dialogue around the tracker and discuss nationally adapted indicators that they would like to see being monitored in the COVID response. Like Shada has mentioned, we're in discussion with our Jordan country office, who has expressed interest in actually doing a launch nationally, given the presence of the Jordanian National Commission for Women, which is the national machinery in Jordan, and the regional webinar. This has created certain momentum to actually do a launch by the national machinery and involving other stakeholders such as the Ministry of Planning and International Cooperation, which is the coordinator of development assistance, to ensure monitoring of these indicators as well as advocacy for a better gender responsiveness of the response. Connected to that, there was also, similar to what was done in Brazil, a recommendation to produce country-by-country fact sheets and analysis, but to take it further and analyze it from a gender transformative lens. So not only gender sensitivity, but to take it a step further. And this was coming from one of the remarks on some of the measures that I mentioned that address, for example, or target women in the Arab region specifically for care work, rather than giving the opportunity for both men and women. So the transformation aspect was questioned, and this is why this was recommended, and also to identify gaps and maybe develop an action plan for taking it forward. In addition to addressing some of the limitation in our tracker, which is not looking at impact. So what was the impact of these different policy measures on gender equality, and looking perhaps more comprehensively at the sum of measures, not only have a myopic view on what was gender sensitive, but if we look comprehensively, was there any regress? Where were the funds coming from, for example, and so forth. So as Shada mentioned, the tracker as also was considered to be a basis that can be used for capacity building of national stakeholders on specific policy measures, learning from other countries' experiences and building on achievements in the country. And another recommendation, which was also mentioned earlier, is to have more public debate and engage the public in this tracker and develop user-friendly material to share on social media. The data challenge discussion came up in our webinar, given that it is one of the main challenges to not having, or excuses that are usually used for not having, gender responsive measures. And there were recommendations as well for certain alliances between academia, think tanks, and others to overcome the gender disaggregation of data challenge. And then there was a reflection and a point maybe that we can all reflect upon on what is the future of the tracker beyond COVID-19, what will happen to it afterwards. Next slide, and I'll just share final insights. Shada, can I have the next slide, please? So just to sum up, the insight is that this tracker is an opportunity for broader discussions around gender responsive policies, both with the UN agencies as well as with government and CSOs. We can look beyond numbers and descriptive analysis and include qualitative and impact assessments. It's important to move from global to local and engage national stakeholders to ensure ownership and proper updating and tracking. And important to engage women not only in the leadership of the response, but also in the monitoring of tracker for higher accountability. That's it from my side. Thank you very much for the opportunity to participate and contribute, and over to you, Sultan.
Thank you, Rania. Thank you, Shata, for this very comprehensive presentation as well. Some of us were at the Arab States launch, and I think heard from the participants, that need to really kind of localize the tracker. And I think you're making interesting progress in that regard. I now have the task to maybe summarize a little bit what we've heard, given that unfortunately we're already over time and won't have time for an in-depth discussion. But for everyone who has questions, who has further comments, who has ideas for how we can improve and better support you as the core team, please reach out to the core team help desk. I wanted to come back to just maybe 3 points that I think came through in all 3 presentations. I think the first one is very strongly from, I think, Brazil and also Arab states. The tracker is a conversation starter, right? It provides data and it provides an overview that kind of around which you can bring people together to start a conversation. What's then really needed is that localization and make sure that that analysis can be fed into advocacy and policy discussions at the national level. And I think the comparative analysis that Patricia mentioned at the beginning to kind of say, where is the country located, both within the region and globally, is an important starting point for that. But then also the next step, and I think that's something that the Arab States team brought up that is interesting, not only look at the transformative component and go beyond maybe some of the conceptual decisions we've made in the tracker, but the chance at the national level is to also look, have these policy measures that we've documented, have been adopted, have been announced, have been partly implemented, what impact have they had on women and girls on the ground? Right. So I think that's a conversation and research and analysis that can be continued at the national level as well. The other 2 points I wanted to pick up very quickly is that I found interesting from the African Regional Hub is that there's a problem with countries that have very few or no measures in the tracker. And there's an opportunity now, we're working towards an update in September to help us remedy that. And I think, it would be great if some of the country offices and regional offices could look into, where do countries need to be beefed up? But I think it's also a little bit on us in the core team to maybe check where are we thin, and then we may want to reach out to some of the regional and country offices where we're particularly thin and see if we can feed more data into the tracker. And then finally, there were some comments in the chat, and I think the African colleagues also mentioned that there are regional priorities, of course, and not all of them are covered in the tracker. We're not covering health, for example, which is an important dimension of the pandemic, but we are moving towards including green recovery and digital measures later this year. So there is a chance to then work with those new dimensions as well. So that's, I'm sure I haven't drawn out everything that came out in the presentations, but I think it was a really, really good insight into what can be done, and just an encouragement to everyone to keep in touch, reach out to us, let us know how we can support you. We're happy to also assist with some of these comparative analyses with kind of data, pulling out data that may be difficult for some of you to do at the country and regional level. So let's keep in touch. Do take the survey, please. That also helps us and helps us to identify some of the strengths and weaknesses, as Marie-Claire also pointed out. So that's all I wanted to say. Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks for your patience and staying on 10 minutes late, and take care.
Thank you so much. Bye.